When my wife and I bought the old lakefront property on Oak Ridge Lane, we thought we were finally stepping into the quiet life we'd always dreamed of. After years of city chaos, car horns blaring at midnight, neighbors stacked wall to wall, and sirens echoing every other hour, the idea of a secluded home by the water felt like paradise. The place wasn't perfect. The cabin was old and needed work, the dock leaned slightly to one side, and the fence that surrounded the property was weathered and worn. But it was ours. It sat on 2 acres of pristine land with tall trees lining the perimeter and a private trail that led straight to the lake. It was peaceful, quiet, and, best of all, free from the grasp of any homeowners association. Or so we thought. The first 2 days were perfect. We unpacked boxes, set up the kitchen, and spent evenings on the back deck with wine glasses in hand, watching the sunset reflect off the still lake water. Even the dog, Bailey, seemed calmer. I remember turning to my wife and saying, "This is it. This is home." On the morning of the 3rd day, the storm arrived. I had just finished stacking tools in the garage when I heard the sound of heels clicking on gravel. When I looked up, there she was, a perfectly coiffed woman in her late 50s, crisp white blouse, khaki slacks, and a clipboard tucked under her arm like it was an extension of her being. 2 men trailed behind her, one tall and thin, the other shorter, with an HOA badge pinned to his polo shirt. "Good morning," she said, her tone sharp and clipped, like someone who wasn't here for pleasantries. "I'm Karen, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association." I blinked. "Morning. Can I help you with something?" "Yes," she said briskly. "Your fence is in violation of our community standards. It's the wrong color, the wrong height, and doesn't meet the approved design for our neighborhood. You'll need to submit a renovation plan for board approval by Friday." I frowned, leaning against the garage door. "Sorry, but this property isn't part of your HOA." Her eyebrows shot up as if I had just spoken a foreign language. "Every home here is part of the HOA," she said, enunciating each word. "That's how we maintain standards. The rules are not optional." I pulled the folded property deed from my back pocket. I'd been carrying it everywhere as we settled in. "This land predates your association," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Check the county records. My property line stops well outside your jurisdiction." She glanced at the paper but didn't really look. Instead, she straightened her spine and said, "If you refuse to comply, you'll leave us no choice but to fine you for non-compliance." I gave her a polite smile that I didn't feel. "Do what you need to do, ma'am. The fence stays." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over," she said, spinning on her heel and marching down the driveway. The 2 men followed silently, their clipboards clutched like shields. I stood there for a moment, stunned, before shaking my head and muttering to myself, "Welcome to the neighborhood." That night, my wife laughed when I told her. "Ignore her," she said. "Bullies like that just want attention." I wanted to believe her. 2 days later, I caught the first trespasser. It was early in the morning. I was drinking coffee on the porch when I heard a faint clinking noise from the side yard. I stepped down the steps, careful not to make a sound, and walked toward the fence. That's when I saw him, a man in a polo shirt with an HOA compliance badge clipped to his belt, balancing on the second rail of my fence with a tape measure in hand. "Hey," I barked. He startled, nearly dropping the tape. I'm with the HOA," he stammered. "Karen sent me to check the fence height." "You're trespassing," I snapped, grabbing my phone and snapping a picture. "Get off my property now." He didn't wait for me to repeat myself. He jumped down and bolted across the yard, muttering something about just doing my job, as he disappeared into the trees that separated my land from the neighboring lots. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to blow over. By the end of that week, we'd received 2 noise complaints, despite not making a single sound louder than a lawnmower, and a notice claiming we were keeping illegal livestock on the property. We owned 1 dog. Then came the environmental hazard report about our fire pit. And a letter demanding we stop unauthorized shoreline activity, because apparently, enjoying the lake in my own backyard counted as a violation in Karen's book. I called the county office and double-checked. My property was not, and never had been, part of the HOA's jurisdiction. The official even laughed when I explained what was happening. "Document everything," the clerk advised. "If they keep harassing you, you'll have a solid case." That night, sitting on the back deck with my wife, I stared out at the lake and tried to keep my temper in check. "She's not going to stop," I muttered. My wife sighed, resting her hand on mine. "Then we won't back down. Let her make a fool of herself." I wanted to believe it would be that simple. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to back down, not without a fight. And I was right, because a few mornings later, before the sun even rose, I woke to the sound of metal scraping against wood. When I looked out the window, my blood ran cold. 2 men in bright orange HOA patrol vests were scaling the fence, again, flashlights strapped to their heads, tape measures in hand, like they were on some kind of tactical mission. I grabbed my phone and stormed outside, recording every step. "Hey," I shouted, "get off my property right now, or I'm calling the sheriff." They froze like deer in headlights, then scrambled down the fence and sprinted back toward the road, shouting something about inspections. I stood there in my driveway, shaking with anger, my phone camera still rolling. That was the moment I decided, if they wanted to treat my home like their playground, then it was time to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. That morning, after catching the so-called HOA patrol, scaling my fence like burglars, I sat down at the kitchen table with my wife and a cup of coffee. My hands were still trembling with anger as I replayed the footage on my phone. "They're lucky I didn't have my shotgun out there," I muttered, watching the grainy clip of the two men scrambling over the fence like scared squirrels. My wife, ever the voice of reason, sipped her coffee calmly. "We need to do this smart. No yelling, no confrontations that they can twist against us. Document everything, call the sheriff again, and," she glanced out the window at the aging fence, "make it impossible for them to pull this stunt again." I leaned back in my chair. "Impossible, huh? What do you think about a bigger fence?" She raised an eyebrow. "How big?" I smirked. "Big enough that Karen and her clipboard army won't even see the top without a drone." The plan started forming right there. That same afternoon, I called my old buddy Rick, a contractor who owed me a favor from back when I helped him out of a nasty business dispute. "Rick," I said over the phone, "how much would it cost to build a serious fence?" "Something like a wall." "How big are we talking?" Rick asked, amusement in his voice. 10 meters, I said flatly. There was a pause. 10 meters. Are you starting a compound or keeping dinosaurs in there? "Just keeping out busybodies," I replied. "Can you do it or not?" Rick chuckled. "You pay, I build. But get ready for the neighborhood to lose its mind." And lose their minds, they did. By Monday morning, the trucks started rolling in. Gravel trucks, cement mixers, pallets of treated lumber, steel posts, and heavy equipment, everything we needed to turn my modest boundary fence into a fortress. The first day was demolition. Rick's crew tore down the old, weather-beaten fence and cleared the perimeter. I stood in the yard with a coffee, watching Karen pace on her side of the property line, her phone glued to her ear as she gestured wildly at the workers. By the second day, the posts were going in, thick, industrial-grade steel beams spaced evenly along the property line. Karen stormed down the street with her clipboard in hand, shouting over the sound of drills. "This is a violation of community standards," she yelled. "Stop this construction immediately. You need HOA approval for modifications." I didn't even look up from my conversation with Rick. "Not in your jurisdiction, Karen. Check the deed." She stood there for a moment, sputtering like an overheated engine, before storming off toward her house, no doubt to send another barrage of angry emails. By the end of the week, the wall was starting to take shape. 10 meters high, reinforced with steel and concrete, topped with smooth boards that made it impossible to climb. We added motion sensor lights and cameras along the perimeter for good measure. Every day, the neighbors slowed their cars as they drove by, gawking at the construction. Some shook their heads, others gave me a thumbs up, and a few stopped to chat. One older man named Tom leaned against my mailbox one afternoon. "Karen's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years," he said. "Can't say I'm sad to see someone finally stand up to her." I chuckled. She picked the wrong guy to mess with. The HOA letters started coming by the end of the first week. The first one was full of official language, warning me to cease unauthorized construction immediately. The second was more aggressive, threatening daily fines for non-compliance. By the third letter, they were threatening legal action. I sent each letter back, unopened, with a sticky note attached. "Greater than not under your jurisdiction. Step foot on my property again and you'll be hearing from my attorney." 2 weeks into construction, the wall was finished. And it was glorious. 10 meters high, reinforced, painted in a sleek charcoal gray that matched the modern trim on our house. The new gate was automatic, with key code access and cameras that streamed directly to my phone. For the first time since we moved in, I felt a sense of peace knowing no one, not Karen, not her patrol, not anyone, could step foot onto our land again without my permission. The very next morning, the HOA went nuclear. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I heard Karen screaming from the street. "This wall is a disgrace. You're ruining the neighborhood aesthetic. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said calmly, not even bothering to stand up. 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the edge of the driveway. The officers walked up, one of them already looking uncomfortable. "Morning," I said, setting down my mug. "Karen call you." The taller officer nodded. "She says you're constructing an unapproved structure in the neighborhood and refusing to allow inspections." I handed over my deed in a folder with copies of county records. "This property is not part of the HOA. Never has been. This is all legal and permitted by the county." The officers glanced at the paperwork, their expressions shifting. The taller one cleared his throat and turned to Karen, who was still ranting on the sidewalk. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this isn't HOA jurisdiction. Unless you have a court order, you need to leave him alone. Any further harassment could result in trespassing charges." The look on Karen's face was priceless, a mix of shock, humiliation, and pure fury. She sputtered but didn't have a single coherent word as the officers got back into their patrol cars and drove away. I walked up to the gate and smiled. "You heard the man, Karen. Stay on your side of the line." She stormed off without another word. From that day forward, the harassment stopped. No more patrols. No more letters. No more unwanted visitors scaling my fence like it was some kind of neighborhood playground. The wall did exactly what I built it to do. It gave us back our privacy, our safety, and our peace of mind. And every evening, as my wife and I sat on the porch with Bailey curled up at our feet, I'd glance at that towering fence, glowing under the soft motion lights, and smile. Sometimes, I thought, the best way to deal with bullies is to build something they can't climb, and to let them choke on the view.